Welcome everyone. Today, I want to invite you to step outside the familiar timeline of history and look at the past from a very different angle. What if the story of human civilization is not a straight line moving forward but something far more complex? What if history itself has been reset more than once? Most of us grow up learning that civilization began at a clear starting point, early farming communities. The first cities, the rise of writing, and then steady progress toward the modern world. This version of history feels neat and reassuring. But when we slow down and examine the evidence more closely, cracks begin to appear in that simple narrative. The idea we are exploring today is this: human history may not be one continuous timeline, but a sequence of cycles. In this view, civilizations rise, reach high levels of organization and knowledge, then experience a collapse so deep that much of what they knew is lost. What follows is not a continuation, but a restart. New societies emerge, often believing they are the first while unknowingly rebuilding on the remains of something older. This does not mean everything is wiped away completely. Traces remain, strange structures, unfinished ideas, stories passed down as myths, and unexplained gaps in the historical record. Over time, these fragments become disconnected from their original meaning, turning into legends, puzzles, or academic debates. If history truly works this way, then the world we live in today is not the final chapter of a long journey. It is simply the latest version of humanity's attempt to build something lasting. Understanding that possibility changes how we look at the past and how seriously we should think about the future. And with that idea in mind, let us begin the story. When a civilization collapses deeply enough, it does not simply fall and rise again in a recognizable form. Instead, much of its accumulated knowledge disappears, leaving behind only scattered fragments that later generations struggle to understand. This idea challenges the assumption that human progress is permanent or that once a skill is learned, it can never truly be lost. Throughout history, there are moments where complex systems vanish almost overnight. Writing systems disappear. Architectural techniques are forgotten. Entire ways of organizing society fade, even though the people themselves continue to exist. What remains are incomplete traces, ruins without instructions, tools without manuals, and stories without context. These fragments suggest that something more advanced may have existed before, but the continuity needed to preserve it was broken. Unlike slow decline, a true reset severs the chain of transmission. Skills that require long training or collective coordination are especially vulnerable. Once specialists are gone and institutions collapse, even simple seeming knowledge can become unreachable. Later societies may see the results: massive stone structures, precise alignments, or sophisticated layouts, yet lack any clear understanding of how they were achieved. Over time, these remnants become normalized as mysteries. They are absorbed into local legends, attributed to symbolic ancestors, or treated as anomalies that do not fit established timelines. Without written explanations or living traditions, future generations can only guess at their purpose or origin. This pattern creates the illusion that humanity has always progressed forward in a steady climb. In reality, progress may have repeatedly surged and then fallen away, leaving behind only echoes. If advanced societies existed before and were erased by powerful disruptions, then much of what we call lost knowledge was not misplaced by accident, it was abandoned by history itself. Across the world, there are ancient structures that raise an uncomfortable question: how were they actually built? These constructions are not crude or experimental. They display precision, scale, and planning that seem difficult to explain using only the tools officially attributed to their time periods. Massive stones are cut with remarkable accuracy, fitted so tightly that even modern instruments struggle to measure gaps between them. What makes these structures especially puzzling is not just their size, but their consistency. Similar techniques appear in distant regions with no clear connection to one another. Foundations are often more complex than the buildings placed on top of them, as if later societies inherited impressive bases but no longer possessed the knowledge to replicate them. This suggests a decline rather than a gradual improvement in building methods. In many cases, historians explain these achievements by pointing to human labor, patience, and ingenuity. While those explanations account for effort, they often fall short when addressing efficiency and precision. Some stones were transported across long distances, up steep terrain, and placed with exact alignment, all without clear evidence of the logistical systems required to support such work. Over time, these engineering feats are reframed as symbolic achievements rather than technical ones. They are admired but not fully understood. As generations pass, the practical knowledge behind them disappears, leaving only speculation. What remains is the result, not the process. If history experienced major resets, this pattern makes sense. Advanced methods could have existed briefly, then vanished when the societies that maintained them collapsed. Later civilizations may have reused or imitated what they saw, without fully understanding how it was originally done. These ancient structures may not represent the beginning of human engineering, but the remnants of something interrupted, silent evidence of knowledge that did not survive its own era. Across continents and cultures, ancient stories tell remarkably similar tales of sudden destruction and renewal. Floods that cover the world, skies filled with fire, long periods of darkness, and the collapse of entire ages appear again and again in traditions that developed independently. These similarities are often dismissed as coincidence or symbolism, but their consistency raises deeper questions. Many of these myths are not vague or abstract. They describe specific sequences, warnings ignored, rapid devastation, a small number of survivors, and a world that must be rebuilt from the beginning. The details change with geography and culture, but the core structure remains strikingly familiar. When stories align this closely across distant societies, it suggests they may be rooted in shared experiences rather than pure imagination. Oral traditions were designed to preserve memory, especially memories considered too important to forget. Long before written records, stories were used to pass down knowledge about the world, dangers, and survival. When catastrophic events occur on a scale too large to fully explain, they often become encoded in myth. Over generations, factual details soften, but the warning remains. If history has undergone multiple resets, these myths may be echoes of real events that disrupted civilization on a massive scale. Instead of being fictional, they could represent humanity's attempt to remember something it did not yet have the language or tools to document accurately. In that sense, myth becomes a survival mechanism for history itself. As societies rebuild, the original meaning of these stories fades. What was once a record of loss turns into a legend, a moral lesson, or a cultural symbol. Modern interpretations then strip away their historical potential, treating them as metaphor alone. Seen through the lens of repeated resets, these shared myths may not describe the creation of the world, but the repeated destruction of human worlds and the fragile restarts that followed. In the historical record, there are moments where continuity simply disappears. Entire regions show sudden breaks in art styles, construction methods, writing systems, and social organization. These changes are not gradual evolutions. They look more like interruptions, as if a cultural thread was cut and later reattached by people who no longer fully understood what came before. In some cases, writing systems vanish completely and are replaced centuries later by new ones with no clear connection to the originals. Skilled craftsmanship declines, becoming simpler over time rather than more refined. Cities that once showed careful planning and coordination are abandoned, and when settlement returns, it follows entirely different patterns. These shifts suggest more than just political change or economic stress. What makes these gaps unsettling is their scale. Knowledge that would normally be passed from one generation to the next fails to survive. This implies that the structures responsible for preserving memory, schools, traditions, specialists, and leadership were disrupted all at once. When that happens, survival takes priority over preservation, and complexity is often sacrificed. Later societies often treat what remains as sacred, mysterious, or untouchable. They reuse older spaces without understanding their original purpose. Over time, the past becomes fragmented, reduced to isolated pieces that no longer form a complete picture. Historians then attempt to reconstruct continuity where there may have been none. If history followed a smooth upward path, these gaps would be rare and easily explained. Instead, they appear repeatedly across different regions and time periods. This pattern supports the idea that humanity has experienced sharp breaks rather than uninterrupted progress. Seen through this lens, civilization does not rise once and endure. It advances, fractures, and rebuilds each time, carrying less memory of what came before. These cultural gaps may not represent missing information, but moments when history itself was forced to start over. Around the world, archaeologists have uncovered entire cities hidden beneath thick layers of soil, ash, or sediment. These are not slow accumulations caused by everyday life. In many cases, the depth and uniformity of these layers suggest rapid and overwhelming events that covered settlements in a relatively short period of time. What makes this especially striking is how well some of these cities were preserved. Streets remain aligned, walls still stand, and everyday objects are found exactly where they were left. This indicates that people did not have time to dismantle or gradually abandon these places. Life appears to have been interrupted, not relocated. In several regions, newer settlements are built directly on top of older ones, sometimes repeating this pattern multiple times. Each layer represents a separate phase of habitation, divided by moments of destruction. Over time, the original city becomes invisible, its existence forgotten by those living above it. Traditional explanations often focus on floods, volcanic eruptions, or environmental shifts. While these factors certainly play a role, their repeated appearance across different civilizations raises broader questions. If such events were isolated, they would be rare. Instead, they form a recurring pattern in the archaeological record. When cities are buried so completely, it does not just erase buildings, it erases memory. Maps, records, and stories tied to those places vanish with them. Later generations may live above the ruins without any awareness of what lies beneath their feet. If history has experienced multiple resets, buried cities make sense as physical evidence of those moments. They are not symbols or metaphors, but frozen interruptions in time. Each one marks a point where human life was forced to stop, reset, and begin again without fully remembering what came before. What is often described as the beginning of civilization may actually be a process of rediscovery rather than true invention. When societies rebuild after a major collapse, they do not start from nothing. They inherit landscapes shaped by earlier people, encounter ruins they did not create, and find traces of systems they no longer understand. Over time, these inherited remnants are woven into new cultural identities. Early cities, farming techniques, and social structures are usually presented as sudden breakthroughs. Yet many of these developments appear rapidly and with surprising sophistication. Instead of long experimental phases, some societies emerge already organized, already skilled, as if following a template rather than inventing one from scratch. This raises the possibility that knowledge was recovered, simplified, or adapted from something older. When people encounter abandoned structures or altered land, they often repurpose them without understanding their original design. Irrigation channels become myths of divine creation. Stone platforms turn into sacred spaces. The function is forgotten, but the form remains. Over generations, reuse replaces understanding, and memory fades into tradition. This process creates a misleading narrative. Later historians see the moment of reuse or adaptation and label it a beginning. In reality, it may be a continuation stripped of context. Without written records or living witnesses, it becomes nearly impossible to distinguish invention from inheritance. If history has been reset before, then many firsts may not be first at all. They may be echoes of earlier attempts, reconstructed by people doing their best with limited information. Civilization, in this view, does not suddenly appear. It re-emerges imperfect, incomplete, and unaware of how much has already been lost. Understanding this possibility challenges the idea of linear progress. It suggests that humanity has rebuilt itself more than once, each time mistaking recovery for origin and survival for innovation. Agriculture and writing are often described as humanity's greatest breakthroughs, marking the clear divide between prehistoric life and civilization. Yet when examined closely, both appear suddenly and spread rapidly, with surprisingly little evidence of long trial and error phases. This has led some to question whether these skills were truly invented from scratch. In several regions, early farming practices emerge with advanced planning already in place. Crop selection, seasonal timing, and land management appear well understood from the start. Similarly, writing systems often begin fully functional, capable of recording complex ideas, trade, and administration. Instead of gradual development, they arrive structured and purposeful. If earlier civilizations existed and collapsed, these skills may have survived only in fragments passed down informally or rediscovered through observation. Later societies could have rebuilt them in simplified forms, unaware that they were restoring something old rather than creating something new. Over time, these reconstructed systems became foundations for new cultures. This would explain why early writing often shows abrupt changes or disappears entirely, only to be replaced by a different system later. The continuity needed to maintain literacy may have been broken, forcing each generation to relearn or reinvent methods of recording information. The same applies to farming knowledge, which can be lost quickly when populations are displaced or environments change. When viewed through this lens, progress looks fragile rather than inevitable. Even the most basic pillars of civilization depend on stable conditions and shared memory. Once those are disrupted, humanity can regress dramatically. If agriculture and writing were relearned after past collapses, then modern civilization is built on recovered knowledge layered over forgotten foundations. What we consider ancient innovations may actually be the remnants of lessons learned long before and lost just as easily. If civilization has been reset before, then modern society may not be the peak of a single, continuous journey, but simply the most recent version of a repeating pattern. In this perspective, humanity advances, collapses, and rebuilds not once, but many times each cycle, believing it is unique. What separates our era from earlier ones may not be intelligence or creativity, but access to surviving fragments of the past combined with temporary stability. Technologies accumulate quickly when conditions allow it, giving the illusion of unstoppable progress. Yet history shows that complexity also increases vulnerability. The more interconnected a society becomes, the more fragile it can be when disrupted. This idea reframes how we view earlier civilizations. Instead of seeing them as primitive ancestors, we may be looking at previous attempts that reached their own forms of sophistication before disappearing. Their limits were not necessarily intellectual, but structural. When key systems failed, knowledge did not smoothly transfer forward, it fractured. Modern humanity often assumes that records, data, and digital storage guarantee permanence. But these systems rely on energy, infrastructure, and global cooperation. Without them, information becomes inaccessible almost instantly. A future society might inherit our ruins without understanding our tools, much like how we view ancient remains today. Seeing ourselves as the latest iteration introduces humility into the story of progress. It suggests that advancement is not guaranteed and that survival depends as much on resilience as innovation. Our technologies may feel permanent, but they exist within narrow conditions that can change. If earlier versions of civilization believed they were secure, they were mistaken. That possibility applies equally to us. The question is not whether humanity can advance further, but whether it can maintain continuity long enough to avoid repeating the same cycle again, building higher each time, yet forgetting how easily it can all disappear. When examining the possibility of repeated resets, the next question is unavoidable: what could have caused them? The scale of destruction implied by lost civilizations and buried cities suggests events far larger than ordinary conflict or local collapse. These disruptions would have needed to affect wide regions, if not the entire world. Natural forces are often the first explanation. Sudden climate shifts, extreme weather patterns, or major environmental changes could destabilize food systems and force mass migration. In such conditions, survival becomes the priority, and complex societies struggle to adapt quickly enough. Over time, knowledge that once supported civilization fades as people focus on immediate needs. Other disruptions may have come from within. As societies grow more complex, they depend heavily on interconnected systems. When these systems fail through resource exhaustion, internal breakdown, or widespread instability, the collapse can spread rapidly. Once central coordination is lost, even advanced cultures can unravel in a short period of time. What makes these resets especially effective is their ability to break continuity. It is not just infrastructure that is lost, but memory itself. Without stable institutions, there is no reliable way to pass knowledge forward. Each generation becomes further removed from what came before. Importantly, these disruptions do not need to be singular or identical. Different regions may have experienced different triggers, yet the outcome was similar: fragmentation, simplification, and restart. Over centuries, these events blur together, leaving only faint traces in the historical record. Seen this way, resets are not anomalies. They are part of a repeating pattern where civilization expands until it becomes vulnerable, then contracts under pressure. Understanding this helps explain why progress is uneven and why history may be far less stable than it appears. If history has already been reset multiple times, then the idea of a future reset is not speculation, it is a pattern repeating itself. Civilizations in the past likely believed they had reached a level of stability that would endure. From their perspective, their systems probably felt permanent, their knowledge secure, and their progress unstoppable. Modern society shares that same confidence. Technology advances at an unprecedented pace, and information is stored in vast digital networks. Yet these systems are highly dependent on energy, coordination, and global infrastructure. If those supports were disrupted, much of what defines modern life could vanish quickly. Unlike physical records, digital knowledge leaves little behind when power and access disappear. Future generations might inherit abandoned cities, machines without instructions, and landscapes altered by technologies they no longer understand. Without continuity, even advanced achievements can become meaningless artifacts. History suggests that resets do not announce themselves. They build quietly through stress, imbalance, and fragility. When the break finally comes, it often feels sudden, even if the conditions were forming for centuries. Past civilizations may have missed the warning signs because they were too close to them. Recognizing this possibility is not about fear. It is about awareness. If humanity understands that collapse is part of its own history, it gains the chance to respond differently. Resilience, adaptability, and preservation of knowledge become as important as innovation. If a future reset is possible, then the present moment carries weight. The choices made today shape not just progress, but continuity. Whether this cycle repeats again depends on whether humanity can learn from what was lost before or whether it will leave behind only fragments for others to rediscover. When viewed as a series of resets, history stops being a story of steady progress and becomes something closer to a repeated warning. Each civilization builds, expands, and reaches a point where it believes it has outgrown the risks that destroyed those before it. And each time, that confidence may be misplaced. The most troubling aspect of repeated resets is not the destruction itself, but the loss of memory. Lessons learned through failure do not carry forward intact. They are buried, mythologized, or misunderstood. As a result, each new civilization faces old dangers without recognizing them as familiar. The past tries to warn the future, but the message is incomplete. This may explain why similar patterns keep emerging: overexpansion, fragile systems, imbalance between growth and stability. Without clear knowledge of prior collapses, societies mistake temporary success for permanence. They optimize for speed and scale, not endurance. Physical ruins, shared myths, and cultural gaps may be the only signals left behind, markers that something went wrong before. But without context, these signals are easy to ignore. They are studied as curiosities rather than cautions. History becomes something to admire, not something to learn from deeply. If modern humanity is aware that it may not be the first to reach this level of complexity, then the past takes on new urgency. Preservation of knowledge, decentralization of systems, and long-term resilience become essential, not optional. Progress without continuity simply sets the stage for repetition. In this sense, history is not hidden, it is incomplete. It whispers instead of speaks. Whether the cycle continues depends on whether humanity can finally treat history not as a finished record, but as an unfinished message, one that has been said before, and may not survive being ignored again. When all of these ideas are viewed together, a larger picture begins to form. History no longer looks like a straight road leading forward, but like a path that has been walked, erased, and walked again. Civilizations may rise with confidence, build remarkable systems, and believe their achievements will last forever, only to leave behind fragments when continuity breaks. If this perspective is even partly true, then the past is not distant or irrelevant. It is deeply connected to the present. The ruins, myths, and gaps we study are not random mysteries, but signals of what happens when complexity outpaces resilience. They remind us that progress alone is not enough. What matters is what survives disruption. Understanding history this way does not mean expecting collapse. It means recognizing patterns early, valuing preservation as much as innovation, and questioning the assumption that our era is immune to the forces that ended others. The real lesson may not be about what was lost, but about what must be protected. If history has been reset before, then awareness is our greatest advantage. Whether humanity repeats the cycle or finally breaks it may depend on how seriously we listen to the quiet warnings left behind. Thank you for watching, and for taking this journey through a different way of seeing the past. If this perspective made you think, feel free to share your thoughts. Until next time, take care and keep questioning history.